and gentlemen, give it up for Tanya Jarvik!
So this past fall, I spent a few days on the Oregon coast in a beach house with a wonderful group of women, about 10 or 12 of us, and we call ourselves the Poly Mamas, because we're all mothers and we're also all poly. Anyway, I love hanging out with these ladies, and not just when I'm on the Oregon coast in a beach house, sipping wine and hanging out and not having any duties, like laundry. So one of the things that I really love about hanging out with these women is that there's no taboo topic. We can talk about pretty much anything. And one of the mornings it was raining, so we're all sitting around the living room talking about, I don't know what happens when your teenager wants a different gender pronoun than you've raised them with, or something like that. And one of the women comes in and says, "Is anybody going to be using the back bedroom for the next little while?" And we said, "No." She said, "Well, I'm going to be back there masturbating. I probably need about 15 minutes, so please don't disturb me." And we were like, "Cool, badass, you go, girl." And I just was struck in that moment. The last time I was in a house full of women like this was under very different circumstances. It was my freshman year at Brigham Young University. BYU, for those of you who don't know, it's a Mormon university, and you have to sign up and say that you will attend church at least 80% of the time, and that you'll wear nothing above the knee, and men have to have their haircuts above the collar and with their ears showing, and the no bra look is not acceptable, etc. And what I was doing at Brigham Young University is kind of a long story, but let's just say that my parents were very worried about me, and I made a compromise, partly also because I had only applied to one college, so it was either I go there or I don't go to college. So day one, freshman orientation. I'm living in Heritage Halls, which is an apartment-style dorm complex. So there are 5 roommates, and it's like 3 bedrooms, 2 girls to a bedroom, and we have a kitchen and like a little living room. And I don't know any of these women, girls, women. I could never figure out whether we were girls or women at that age. And we're all sitting in one of the bedrooms. We've come from all over the country, and we're getting to know each other. And almost the first thing out of one girl's mouth was, "So, we're all virgins, right?" And I was petrified, because the fact was, I was not a virgin. And I did not want to admit this, because they would think I was a bad person if I said this. And also, I didn't want to lie, because the only thing worse than having had premarital sex was lying. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what will I say? I mean, I can't really go into the whole story about how it is that right after high school graduation, I was thinking about my boyfriend of the whole senior year, and how we were going to go off to our separate colleges, and how I was going to miss him terribly. And I really was thinking, I wasn't so sure that I believed in the church anymore, and I would really love to have sex with him before we went our separate ways, possibly forever. And I was out looking at the stars one night, and I had an epiphany. I was really big on epiphanies in those days. And I was looking at the stars, and I was thinking, you know, God has a lot of really important things to do, like hanging out, keeping the laws of physics running, and he might not mind so much if a teenage girl decides to have sex with her boyfriend before she goes to college. And so this was kind of how it had happened. Luckily, we didn't actually have to take the survey and go around and say, "Yes, actually I'm a virgin." I didn't actually have to say this, and the conversation moved on to like romance novels or something, and so I dodged that bullet. Day 2, I wasn't quite so lucky because it was the interview with the bishop. Now, that's the ecclesiastical leader, and every one of us had to go down to the basement and have this conversation with this like 40-year-old guy who looked like a cross between Dracula and Mickey Mouse. So we're all 18-year-old girls, and we all have to troop down there, and then he asks us questions like, so how's your testimony? What do you, and your testimony is like, what do you believe? Are you believing in all the church doctrine? And I said, well, that depends on what you mean, because I don't really have a testimony of celestial polygamy. And just a side note, for those of you who are not familiar with Mormon doctrine, mainstream Mormons do not practice polygamy, but it was something that happened in the early days of the church in the 1800s. And so there are all these women who were married to, so it's like one guy and multiple sister wives, right? And it can only be one man and many women. You can't be a woman and have multiple partners. It's, yeah. So I said, I think, and the reason why you have to have celestial polygamy is that all these early Mormon people were polygamous, and now they're in heaven, presumably, so it must be okay for a man to have multiple wives in heaven, right? So I said, well, I don't believe in celestial polygamy, I think it's sexist. And you know, my great-great-grandmother was a third wife, so, and the bishop says, well, yeah, sometimes our testimonies are a journey. Now let me ask you about your moral cleanliness. And then he lists off this laundry list of sexual sins I might have committed: masturbation, fornication, petting, blah, 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 blah. And again, I'm petrified because at this point, I would much rather just say, yeah, I've had sex with my boyfriend, as opposed to saying, yeah, I tried masturbating once or twice. Because if you're a Mormon girl, you're really not supposed to be masturbating. It is somewhat kind of wink, wink, boys will be boys for boys, and for girls, there's just no fucking excuse. So I managed to just skip over that part, and I confessed to having had sex with my boyfriend, and he counseled me to talk to him further about it so that I wouldn't have to be bearing the burden of this guilt all on my own. And I was feeling pretty icky about this conversation. I walk up from the basement, and my roommates and housemates are standing in the kitchen, and they're all talking about their interviews with the bishop. And one of them says, did he ask you if you masturbated? And the other girl goes, I didn't even know what he was talking about. And one of the other ones said, that is so gross. Why would anyone do that? And I thought, I do not belong here. So from that day, I decided, all right, since I don't belong here, we're just going to be like all out with the not belonging here. And I was on a campaign to prove to myself and everyone else that I didn't belong there. And so this kind of, there were two components to this, and one was a not secret, very obvious in your face component, and that was, I stopped shaving my legs, stopped shaving my armpits, stopped wearing makeup, started wearing flannel shirts, and painted my fingernails black, and started listening to Depeche Mode and Nirvana. So it was this early 90s grunge, goth, granola combo. I didn't actually know what it was, it just wasn't BYU, right? So that was one component. The other component is that it was a secret component, and I was absolutely determined to figure out how to have an orgasm. Because I had never had one, right? I'd had sex a couple of times with my, at the time, before we had sex, also virgin boyfriend. Okay, so no orgasm. And so I started experimenting. I was about a week in, and I was feeling like I really needed to talk to somebody about this, and it was not going to be the bishop. So I opened a new spiral-bound notebook because I've always kept a journal ever since I was like 10. And I wrote on the first page, in the event of my death, which shouldn't be for a long time, I do not wish that this journal be read by my parents or my siblings or to be made public in any way. Thank you. Sorry if this is paranoid. Signed, dated. And then I described what I had been experiencing over this past week, which was when I'd start touching myself, it would take me like a long time, maybe 20 minutes to get to the point where I wanted to stop. And I was trying to describe what that was like and what it felt like. And I was saying, well, all of a sudden there's this change, and everything goes from being moist to being really quite wet and swollen. And then I feel really amazing, and then that's it. And then I feel like I'm done. So is that an orgasm? I'm not sure. And then the next entry was, okay, actually it was because this time that end point was accompanied by these shaky waves all down my body. And so I was really excited about this. And then the very next day I thought, I have been really imprudent writing this down in my journal because somebody is bound to come read this and then that's going to be really bad. So I closed it and I buried it under a pile of books and I started a new journal, and this one I decided I was going to be even more secretive. It was going to be in code. And so anytime I had an orgasm and I felt like I wanted to mention it for some reason, like it was interesting because it happened in the bathtub, I would say, I found an aardvark. Okay, I have no idea why aardvarks. I mean, the double A is kind of sexy. I don't even know what aardvarks look like. So I found a lot of aardvarks that year in college. Part of it was that I was this kid in a candy store discovering my own sexual pleasure for the first time after having grown up very repressed. Part of it was also that I was lonely and nobody was touching me. I grew up in an affectionate family. I had friends. I had a boyfriend in high school, and now all of a sudden I'm all alone. And so one of the things I started doing was looking for other people who also looked like they didn't belong, and trying to figure out where people who didn't belong at BYU but who were at BYU might be hanging out. And so one of the places I discovered was the International Cinema. And the cool thing about the International Cinema is all of the films shown on the BYU campus are censored, but the International Cinema, sometimes they didn't really get what was sexual. And so there'd accidentally be like a scene in there that was pretty racy if you knew what you were looking for. And the other cool thing about the International Cinema is that the graduate student who looked at your little International Cinema card to let you in was this guy who grew his hair out longer than regulation, and he got around it by tucking his hair behind his ears so that it looked like his ears were showing. But when he'd bend over to look at my card, this long strand of hair would fall forward and kind of brush his jaw. It was almost more than I could handle. So sometimes, after going to the International Cinema, I would come home and my roommate, I'll call her June because she was kind of like an early 90s June Cleaver with the spiral perm and the claw bang. She'd be asleep in bed, and our beds were like this L shape. And her head was by my feet, so here are my feet and here's her head. And so I'd get all ready for bed and I'd take out my contacts. I'm really, really nearsighted. And I'd get into bed and I'd be pretty sure she's asleep. And I'd be lying there thinking, I'm really sure she's asleep, but how do I know she's asleep? And I'd try looking at her and I wouldn't be able to see anything. I can't see her eyes, I can't see her nose, I can't see. And I'd be wishing she snored, but she didn't snore. She didn't even breathe in her sleep, it seemed like. And finally, I would just decide, okay, I'm just gonna have to go for it. And so I pull my legs up, so it made this tent. The idea was maybe she would be able to see my face. She'd just see this like wall of blanket. And I would go really slowly and really modulate my breathing. And I'd be thinking, how likely is it that she'd be able to figure out what it is that I'm doing? I mean, I don't know. And then of course, the last minute or so, I just kind of give up with that. Probably the bed was vibrating and I was breathing funny. And I wasn't feeling guilty about what I was doing at all. I felt good about it, but I was also very paranoid about judgment and about that I might be disturbing my roommate. And so it was bothering me that as the term went on, she seemed to kind of withdraw and to be less friendly toward me. And then one day she told me she was going to be moving out at the end of the term. And of course I thought to myself, well, does it have anything to do with the fact that you're having a hard time sleeping sometimes? But of course I wasn't going to say anything, and so then I went into the living room and there were two other of my housemates there. And I said, hey, did you know June's moving out at the end of the term? And they said, yeah, we're thinking about moving out too. And I said, well, why? And they said, because there's a bad spirit in this apartment, and it's you. So I got my coat and I walked outside. It was dark, it was raining, and I just went on a walk. I didn't know where I was going. I felt horrible. And I thought to myself, I've heard so much in my life this phrase, wickedness never was happiness. And I'm so miserable in this moment. Maybe this is a sign that I actually am a bad person. And I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And then I saw this little tree growing in concrete by the side of the road. And I was just drawn to the tree because it reminded me of myself as sort of like this skinny little thing somewhere it doesn't belong. And how's it ever gonna grow stuck in concrete like this? And I went up to the tree and I just put my arms around it. And actually, I felt a lot better. I felt like the tree was telling me something. The tree was telling me, I'm just a tree. I don't really think about what people think of me. And so I had this moment of feeling loved and accepted by a tree. And I had another epiphany, and the epiphany was I would just show up as myself and stop worrying so much about what other people thought of me. So here I am again at the beach retreat with the poly mamas, and I was thinking to myself, I would love to go back and give my 18-year-old self a message and just say, good job, you're on the right track. And if you keep this up, things are gonna turn around. They are going to go your way. Your two roommates who said that you were a bad spirit are gonna decide not to move out after all, and the next time your southern roommate talks about being virgins, you're gonna say, I'm just gonna say this once, I'm not a virgin, and she's gonna say, what was it like? And if you want a sneak preview 20 years in the future, I have some good news for you, and I have a little bit of bad news for you. So the good news is, you're gonna find your people. You're gonna have 2 husbands, 2 wonderful children, a group of friends and lovers and ex-lovers and friends, and this wonderful group of poly mamas, tender, tough women who are not afraid of their own sexual power or their own sexual pleasure. And the bad news is, I'm gonna spill your secrets. And for that, I owe you an apology. I'm sorry. And I also owe you an explanation. And the explanation is this: not everybody is as lucky as I am to be surrounded by people who love me for who I am. And there are many people out there who are afraid to tell their stories, and say, this is who I am, this is how I live my life, for fear that they're going to lose their loved ones, their job, or even worse. And so it's important for people who are lucky, like me, to say, you are not alone.